My name is Morwenna Hale, and the day I turned 70 last spring, I discovered that survival sometimes means burying the people you love most, not in the ground, but in the necessary distance between what was and what must be. I'm the kind of woman who transforms chaos into order, who believes that crisp hospital corners and precisely folded napkins aren't just habits, they're armor against a world that threatens to unravel you. That Christmas evening, my dining room gleamed like a stage set for a performance no one wanted to see. White candles cast trembling shadows across the roast duck, their flames dancing as if nervous about what was coming. Crystal water glasses caught the light like imprisoned stars. Everything was flawless, meticulously arranged, achingly perfect. But I've learned that perfection is a dangerous mirror. It reflects not just what you've created, but everything festering beneath the surface. Phaedra materialized across from me in an emerald dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, her nails painted the color of fresh wounds. Her husband Alder hunched beside her, whispering conspiracies into her ear while his eyes darted around my home like a real estate appraiser calculating depreciation. They'd driven down from Atlanta for the holiday, though the moment their car pulled into my driveway, I recognized the truth. My daughter hadn't come to visit. She'd come to conquer. She surveyed my dining room with the cold assessment of a museum curator examining obsolete artifacts, her gaze lingering on my second-hand furniture, my outdated wallpaper, my life of careful budgets and quiet dignity. The judgment radiated from her like heat from asphalt in August. Dinner began with the brittle politeness of strangers at a funeral, small talk about highway traffic, the unseasonably mild coastal weather, nothing that mattered. Then, halfway through the meal, with the timing of an assassin, she leaned forward and detonated her bomb. "You know, Mother," she murmured, her voice smooth as poisoned honey, "people feel genuinely sorry for you, living alone like this, surviving on other people's pity." The words sliced through the candlelit air. I set down my fork with deliberate precision, the soft clink against china the only sound in the suddenly suffocating room. "I live on my pension and my peace of mind," I replied, each word measured and sharp, "both of which I earned through decades of work and sacrifice. You might consider attempting to earn either one yourself sometime." Her smile thinned into something predatory. "You've always got a clever answer ready, haven't you?" Then, dropping any pretense of civility, she struck for the heart. "You've always been nothing but a burden to everyone around you." Alder shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his plate. The candles flickered as if recoiling from the venom. The duck grew cold between us, forgotten, while the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. When I refused to take the bait, when I declined to play the role of the wounded mother begging for scraps of affection, something crystallized in Phaedra's expression, a terrible fusion of triumph and contempt. "In my eyes," she announced, her voice ringing with finality, "you're already dead." For one suspended moment, the antique clock on the mantel filled the silence, each tick hammering against my ribcage like an executioner counting down. I thought of all those nights I'd stayed awake until dawn, hunched over her prom dress, stitching sequins by lamplight until my fingers bled. I remembered the mornings after Thomas died, when I'd driven her to school with tears still wet on my cheeks, pretending everything was fine because she needed stability more than she needed my grief. Those words should have shattered me into irreparable fragments. Instead, they did something unexpected. They clarified everything, like rain washing years of grime from a window. I folded my napkin with the same precision I'd maintained my entire life, placed it beside my untouched plate with ceremonial finality, and spoke one word, "Understood." Then I rose, retrieved my coat from the chair back with unhurried dignity, and walked out into the December cold that felt somehow warmer than the ice inside my own home. Behind me, the candlelight trembled and wavered, as uncertain as everyone else about whom to follow. 2 months later, on an afternoon when the sky opened up and poured its fury onto Savannah, my doorbell began its desperate assault. When I finally opened the door, rain curling around my ankles like cold fingers, my daughter stood there soaked, trembling, unraveling before my eyes. I looked at her steadily, calmly, and whispered the truest thing I'd ever spoken. The dead cannot come back. The morning after that catastrophic Christmas, my house felt like a tomb, as if someone had surgically removed the roof and let all the oxygen escape into the indifferent universe. I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and my reading glasses, but I wasn't making a grocery list. I was cataloging what remained mine, what couldn't be taken, borrowed, or guilt tripped away from me. House deed, I whispered, writing it down with a hand that shook only slightly, savings account, pension, last will, and testament. Each word I inscribed felt like a small fortress wall rising around my depleted heart, a fragile defense against the echo of her voice still reverberating through my skull. For decades, my daughter had mastered the art of blurring the boundary between generous help and suffocating debt. It began with innocuous requests: $30 for a school field trip, $50 for new shoes that weren't actually necessary, a few hundred for college textbooks she probably never opened. "I'll pay you back so soon, Mom, I promise," she'd say with those wide, earnest eyes that used to make me melt. And fool that I was, I believed her every single time. Then the requests metastasized into something more insidious. Wedding deposits that could have fed a small village. Down payments on condos in neighborhoods she couldn't actually afford. Temporary help when Alder's perpetually failing business ventures inevitably collapsed like houses built on sand. Every time she swore it was the last, every time I reached for my checkbook like a junkie reaching for one more fix. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and called the bank on Broughton Street. "I need to verify account access," I told the clerk, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who is currently listed on my savings and checking accounts?" She confirmed only my name appeared. "Just mine, no co-signers, no emergency access. No daughter with her hand perpetually extended. Thank you." I breathed, hanging up before the tears could betray me. In my old financial ledger, the one with the cracked leather binding and pages yellowed by time, I turned to a pristine page and wrote across the top in bold letters, "No more rescue." The ink bled slightly, spreading like something alive and wounded. When I closed the book with a decisive thump, an unwanted memory surfaced like a body floating to the surface of dark water. Phaedra at 8 years old, standing on that rickety folding stage at her elementary school talent show. She'd sung completely off key, but with the fearless volume of someone who believed the world wanted to hear her voice. She grinned through the gaps where baby teeth used to be while I clapped until my palms burned, until my hands were red and aching, until every other parent had stopped and I was still applauding, because I needed her to know someone saw her worth. Back then, her pride was uncomplicated, pure. She just wanted me to witness her existence, to validate that she mattered. I'd kept seeing her, kept validating her, even when she no longer looked back. Every loan I granted, every favor I provided, every time I swallowed my objections and opened my wallet. I'd mistaken these transactions for love, convinced myself that giving meant caring. The kettle shrieked on the stove, pulling me back to the present. I poured the boiling water, watched the steam spiral upward like departing ghosts, and spoke aloud to the empty kitchen. Love without respect is just control wearing a prettier mask. The words didn't echo. They landed like a door slamming shut on a chapter I'd been reading far too long. I crossed out the word help on my list and replaced it with peace. Then I set the pen down, smoothed the paper flat with both palms, and let the quiet settle over me. The kind of silence that demands nothing except your willingness to face the truth. I keep my old financial ledgers stacked in a cedar chest near the window, their brown covers softened by years of anxious handling. Each page represents a record of what I sacrificed and what I desperately hoped would be reciprocated. They were never intended as instruments of guilt, merely as chronicles of memory. Still, as I opened one now, the past surged forward line by agonizing line. Phaedra's name first appeared in an entry from 2 decades ago. Credit card emergency, $200. She says it's urgent. I remembered her voice on the phone, tight with manufactured embarrassment. It's just a small balance, Mom, nothing major. I'll pay you back this Friday. I absolutely promise. Friday became summer. Summer dissolved into silence. I marked it as cleared anyway, because admitting the truth would have broken something I wasn't ready to lose. Another page documented the wedding year, the loan of $15,000 for a reception hall deposit. She'd insisted on a downtown ballroom dripping with chandeliers and imported linens, though Thomas and I had offered the beautiful garden behind our house, the one he'd spent years cultivating. "It's my dream wedding, Mother," she'd said, her eyes blazing with the same confidence that used to charm me into anything. Alder had smiled beside her, all expensive cologne and hollow ambition, and I'd written that check with pride and dread braided together in my chest. Thomas had been gone only 3 years then, and I could almost hear his carpenter's wisdom echoing. She needs to start with what she earns, not what she borrows. He'd been a craftsman his entire life, the kind of man who built things designed to outlast him, tables that wouldn't wobble, roof beams that wouldn't sag, promises that wouldn't crumble under pressure. When the inevitable bills arrived, I thought of him sanding that porch rail until it gleamed like glass. He worked by the sacred rule that nothing you build should depend on luck or hope, only on solid foundations and honest labor. My phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating with insistence. Phaedra again, or perhaps Alder trying a different angle. I didn't check. Instead, I took a blank check from my current checkbook, stared at the empty line waiting for her name like a grave waiting for a body. My hand trembled once, just once, then steadied with resolve. I tore it down the center, then quartered it, then shredded it into small white flakes that fell like snow into the fireplace. The scraps curled in the embers, blackening and shrinking to nothing but gray ash and forgotten obligations. In that quiet moment, I imagined Thomas's calloused hand covering mine, steady, rough-edged, certain of what needed to be done. The ledgers remained spread open on the table, each line of faded ink a record not of money lost, but of lessons learned catastrophically late. Some debts, I realized, are only truly paid when you finally stop paying them. Lenora Beck arrived the next morning, knocking softly before pushing my door open with her elbow, a toolbox balanced in her arms. "You called about changing the locks," she said matter-of-factly. Her gray hair was pinned in its usual no-nonsense twist, a screwdriver protruding from her coat pocket, like a declaration of purpose. Figured it was time, I told her. Old keys have a way of traveling too far, ending up in the wrong hands. She gave me a knowing look that conveyed decades of understanding. They certainly do when family's involved. Keys and guilt, they both get passed around more than they should. While she worked, the smell of brass polish saturated the hallway. The old bolts groaned like arthritic joints as they surrendered their hold. "These have definitely seen better days," she muttered, installing new hardware with practiced efficiency. I stood nearby, consulting the checklist I'd meticulously prepared. Bank accounts, digital passwords, medical contacts, emergency numbers. Lenora glanced up, one eyebrow raised. "You sound like a woman boarding up a shop for a long winter." "Maybe I am," I acknowledged, "except this particular store is staying permanently closed to certain shoppers." Her laugh was brief but genuinely kind. "About damn time, Morwenna." When she finished, she set down her screwdriver, and tested the new deadbolt with a satisfying click. "That'll hold against whatever storm comes," she said, then lowered her voice to something almost tender. "Remember, you don't owe anyone an open door just because they're related to you by blood." After she left, I called my attorney's office with hands that barely shook at all. The young assistant answered, her voice cheerful and professionally crisp. "Yes, Ms. Hale, we can absolutely update your file today," she said. "You're removing your daughter from your emergency contacts and medical proxy. No problem whatsoever." The words stung like antiseptic on an open wound, but relief flooded in immediately behind the pain. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and withdrew a single sheet of cream stationery from the drawer. The pen hovered above the paper for a long moment before I began writing in careful script. "Phaedra, I love you, but there will be no more money. Please do not ask me again. I can only give what doesn't cost my peace of mind, my security, or my survival." I read it twice, folded it with precision, sealed it in an envelope, and tucked it into the drawer beside my will. It wasn't a threat or an ultimatum, just truth, written as plainly as I knew how to write it. The next day, I walked to the small literacy center on Bull Street, the morning air crisp and promising. The director looked surprised to see me, then broke into a warm smile. "Back for another volunteer round, if you'll have me," I said. She pressed a hand to my shoulder with genuine affection. "We always do, Morwenna, always." On my way home, I stopped at a local craft shop and purchased a small brass plaque engraved with 5 words that had become my new creed: "Peace requires permission." By dusk, it hung beside my door, gleaming faintly in the porch light as if testing its promise, daring the world to challenge its truth. Most mornings now, I wake before the sunrise paints the sky. The quiet feels earned rather than imposed, a privilege I've purchased with difficult choices. I slip on my coat and walk toward Forsyth Park, the air cool enough to sting my cheeks and remind me I'm alive. The fountains start early, steady, patient streams instead of the raised voices that used to fill my mornings. I used to dread silence, feared it like most people fear darkness. Now it sounds like irrefutable proof that the world can continue rotating without my constant apologies, without my perpetual sacrifice. When I return, the porch light catches the curve of my new brass plaque, "Peace requires permission." The words shine a little brighter each day, as if learning how to belong there, as if understanding they've finally found their permanent home. Esmond Rook comes by twice weekly to inspect the railing Thomas built years ago, before cancer stole him from me. Esmond is older now, moves slower, but he's still remarkably steady with a hammer and level. "You've got rot developing under here," he said one morning, tapping a suspicious board with his knuckle. "Story of my entire life," I replied without bitterness. He smiled the kind that doesn't mock or pity, just understands. "Then we'll start by salvaging what still holds and replace what's beyond saving." We worked in companionable silence, the rhythm of nails and wood filling the space that used to overflow with arguments and accusations. When he left, he wiped his weathered hands on a rag and said, "You're doing remarkably fine, Morwenna. Not everyone learns how to live smaller and call it peace instead of failure." I nodded. Smaller, yes, but finally, completely my own. Cooking for one used to feel like an apology to the universe for existing. Now I measure ingredients without resentment. A single egg, half a cup of rice, portions that make sense. The pan doesn't need company or witnesses. It just needs time and attention. I sit by the window and eat slowly, deliberately, without television noise or phone distractions. Just me, my food, and the sound of my own thoughts for company. At the literacy center, they paired me with a young woman named Inez, barely 20, who could barely speak above a whisper when we first met. "I never finished school," she confessed, eyes downcast with shame. "Letters mix up and jumble when I try to read them. The words swim around on the page. I slid the book closer between us. Then we'll slow them down together until they stop moving. We'll make them behave." When she successfully sounded out a complete sentence that first afternoon, her face illuminated like sunrise breaking over the ocean. I remembered Phaedra at that same age, demanding I listen, wanting everything faster, louder, immediately. Afterward, I stayed late at the center, writing in my small personal journal. A line came to me while watching Inez trace words with her finger, her concentration absolute. Peace has no applause, no standing ovation, but it hums a constant, reassuring frequency only you can hear. I closed the book and sat listening to that quiet hum resonating in my chest. Lenora intercepted me outside one afternoon, mail clutched in her hand and gossip written across her face in neon. "You've heard, haven't you?" she said, lowering her voice despite the empty street. "Heard what specifically?" "About Alder's firm," she whispered dramatically. "Under federal investigation for something involving falsified tax returns. They repossessed their car yesterday, one of those shiny German imports he used to polish obsessively every weekend like it was made of diamonds." I stared at the stack of envelopes in my hands, my expression carefully neutral. "That particular kind of shine never lasts long. It's all surface, no substance." She nodded, lips pursed with satisfaction. "I'm sorry, Morwenna. I know she's still your girl, regardless of everything." "Was," I said quietly. The word emerged too easily, but it didn't sting the way I'd expected. Was my girl. Inside, I sorted through the mail with mechanical efficiency. Electric bill, pharmacy notice, and one envelope addressed to Phaedra using my home address, the handwriting slightly smudged as if written in haste. Same last name, close enough proximity for an understandable postal mistake. I opened it before thinking better of the violation, before conscience could intervene. A bank statement bloomed in my hands, late fees highlighted in aggressive red, threatening words like "final notice" and "foreclosure review pending," stamped across multiple pages. I refolded it with meticulous care and set it aside, my hands trembling only once, briefly. That night, I made chamomile tea and opened my laptop against my better judgment. I typed her name into the search bar, then held my breath. There she was, smiling brilliantly in a sequined dress at some rooftop brunch event, champagne glass raised high, the caption reading, "Success is a mindset, living my best life, #blessed, #grateful." The jewelry encircling her wrist glinted under camera flash, borrowed sparkle she couldn't afford, purchased with money that didn't exist. Her followers wrote effusive praise beneath the facade. "You're amazing. Such an inspiration. Teach me your secrets." I felt my chest constrict with a strange ache that wasn't anger, wasn't even disappointment, something closer to grief for a person who no longer existed, if she ever truly had. Esmond stopped by later to return a wrench he borrowed. He took one look at my face and immediately understood. "You saw something you probably shouldn't have," he observed gently. "She's still pretending," I said. "Even now, even as everything collapses around her, she's still maintaining the illusion." He set the wrench down with careful deliberation. "When a house made entirely of glass finally shatters, everyone bleeds. Doesn't matter who threw the first stone." I glanced at the bank letter on the counter, that evidence of impending ruin. "Then I'll maintain my distance from the shards. I've been cut enough." He nodded once, approving. "Good, wise. Just don't forget distance doesn't automatically mean cruelty. You can protect yourself without becoming heartless." When he left, I tore the bank statement into narrow strips and fed them methodically to the kitchen trash bin. The sound was sharp and satisfying, like tearing old fabric that no longer fit. As I switched off the lights, I whispered to the gathering darkness, "But I no longer live in that glass house. I built something sturdier. The storm began just after dusk descended on Savannah. February rain slanted hard against my porch, driven by wind that howled like something wounded and furious. I was sorting receipts at the table when the doorbell erupted, shrill, desperate, held too long, then frantic pounding that rattled the frame. I rose slowly, heart beating steady but heavy as lead. Through the glass panel I saw her standing there, Phaedra with hair plastered to her cheeks, mascara streaking down her face in black rivers. The porch light threw her shadow across the railing Esmond had recently mended, making her look simultaneously larger and smaller than she actually was. "Mom, please," she shouted, her voice cracking with panic. "I need to talk to you right now." I opened the door halfway. Cold air and desperation rushed in together. "They're evicting us," she cried, words tumbling over each other. "The bank is taking the house. Alder left, he just packed a bag and left me with everything. Mom, I need a short-term loan, that's all I'm asking. I'll pay every penny back. I swear on everything I swear." Rain dripped from her designer coat onto my welcome mat, forming a spreading puddle. I caught the smell of wet wool and pure panic. "Come inside," I said, though I didn't step aside to allow entry. "You'll catch your death standing out there." She shook her head violently, water flying from her hair. "Please, I have literally nowhere else to turn, just until next month. You always said family helps family. You said that my entire childhood." I steadied my voice, made it gentle but immovable. "Family helps when it can, Phaedra. I can't." Her eyes widened with genuine disbelief, almost childish in its completeness. "You mean you won't? You're doing this specifically to punish me for what I said at Christmas?" "No," I said softly. "I'm doing this to survive myself, to preserve what little peace I've managed to build." She pressed a trembling hand to the doorframe, fingers white with pressure. "You don't understand what it's like, Mother. The bills piling up, the shame, people whispering behind my back. I do understand," I interrupted quietly. "I lived through your whispers for years. I know exactly what it feels like." The words struck her like a physical blow. For one suspended moment, all that practiced bravado slipped away completely. What stood shivering on my porch wasn't a schemer or a stranger performing an act. It was my daughter, genuinely frightened and drowning in consequences of her own creation. My hand twitched involuntarily toward the desk drawer where my checkbook rested, that old reflex almost overpowering my resolve. Her voice shattered completely. "Please, Mom, I'm begging you." I almost moved, almost reached for that checkbook, almost surrendered to decades of conditioning. Then memory arrived sharp as broken glass, the clink of silverware on Christmas china, her voice cutting across the candlelit table with surgical precision. "In my eyes, you're already dead." I looked at her now, alive, present, but hollowed out by her own carefully constructed choices. My voice emerged steady when I spoke. "The dead cannot come back, Phaedra." Her face crumpled like wet paper. "You can't possibly mean that." "I mean it precisely because I must, because if I don't mean it now, I never will." I closed the door gently, not slammed in anger, but shut with quiet finality. Her sobs blurred and merged with the sound of rain hammering the roof. I leaned against the solid wood, tears sliding down my face in hot tracks, the ache deep and surprisingly clean. Outside, the doorbell eventually stopped its desperate assault. Inside, the quiet held me like something sacred. The morning after the storm, my phone illuminated before sunrise with incoming messages. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years had written, "Your daughter is hurting badly. Why are you being so unnecessarily cruel to your own child?" Another message followed within minutes. "You've forgotten what family means. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water." By noon, I understood why. Phaedra had posted online a carefully composed photograph of herself standing in the rain outside my house, looking appropriately devastated. Her caption read, "Some mothers stop loving when money stops flowing. Heartbroken doesn't begin to describe it." The comments accumulated like debris after a flood. Sympathy, manufactured outrage, strangers eagerly offering pity they'd never have to make good on. She'd always possessed a remarkable talent for gathering an audience. I turned the phone face down on the counter and left it there, silent and dark. Lenora knocked an hour later, holding a pot of homemade soup wrapped in a kitchen towel. I saw the post, she said flatly, setting it on my counter. Don't look at it again. People feast on stories they don't have to actually live through. I didn't respond. I told her. Good, she said firmly. Let her shout into her own echo chamber until she exhausts herself. We sat in silence, the soup cooling between us, two women who understood that sometimes silence is the only appropriate response. After Lenora left, Esmond stopped by with his battered tool bag slung over one shoulder. I heard things got loud here last night, he said carefully. It's quiet now, I told him. He leaned against the railing he'd repaired months earlier, testing its strength. When my son started stealing from me years ago, I kept granting him second chances, third chances, infinite chances. Thought if I loved him hard enough, consistently enough, I could somehow fix it. From the outside, all I accomplished was teaching him how to break me more slowly, more efficiently. I studied his weathered face, worn but steady, like driftwood shaped by decades of waves. Did you ever forgive him? I asked. I did, he said simply, but I did it from across a state line, with locks on my doors and boundaries he couldn't cross. When he left, I sat at my desk and pulled a blank sheet of stationery from the drawer. The words came fast and clean, as if they'd been waiting for permission. Phaedra, when you genuinely want help, I will offer guidance, not rescue. I will listen, but I will not carry you. Difference matters immensely. I folded the page, then unfolded it again. The ink looked too neat, too optimistic, still clinging to hope that should have died years ago. In the fireplace, a small flame waited from the morning's kindling. I fed the letter to it, watching the edges curl inward, shrinking until the words transformed to ash and nothing. I carried those ashes to the porch and scattered them beneath the brass plaque that had become my manifesto. The wind lifted the dust light as smoke, carrying it upward until nothing remained to hold onto. Spring settled slowly over Savannah, soft and forgiving as a benediction. At the Literacy Center, the morning air carried the faint scent of chalk and old paper, smells that meant purpose and renewal. I sat beside Inez as she traced the final line of a story we'd practiced for weeks. Her voice trembled but held steady, growing stronger with each word. The bird found its way home, she read aloud, then looked up with eyes blazing with accomplishment. I did it. I actually did it. You did. I confirmed, squeezing her hand. Every single word belonged to you. You earned them. When the class ended, she hugged me light, uncertain, but genuine, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me when I wanted to give up on myself." Walking home, I contemplated the profound difference between rescue and faith. Rescue takes control away from someone. Faith gives it back and steps aside to let them use it. Esmond was working in my yard when I returned, operating quietly with a saw and level, building something with patient precision. Nearly finished, he said, nodding toward a beautiful new cedar gate rising where the old one had sagged and failed. Built this one significantly stronger to last through storms. I smiled, genuine warmth flooding my chest. You and Thomas would have been good friends. He built for permanence and integrity. You build for peace, Esmond replied. That's harder and matters more. By afternoon, the gate stood firm and complete, its hinges silent, its scent clean and sharp as possibility. It closed with a sound that felt like a promise kept, like something finally, perfectly right. Later that week, I met with my attorney in her sunlit office. We reviewed the papers methodically. My will, my modest savings, the small trust I'd designated for the Literacy Center. It's not much, I said, signing the final line. It's honest. She replied with conviction. in my experience, that counts for considerably more than impressive numbers. Before sealing the folder, I slipped in one additional page, a letter, short and crystalline in its clarity. Phaedra, when your apology is genuine and your requests are reasonable rather than desperate, my door opens, not before. I placed it at the back of the envelope, fully aware that time might never test its conditions. Some letters are written for the writer more than the recipient. That evening, I sat on my porch with tea and watched the light fade across the brass plaque beside my door. Peace requires permission. My reflection wavered on its polished surface, older, softer, marked by difficult choices, but unmistakably, authentically mine. Inside, the house was quiet, but not empty. I thought of Inez, of Lenora, of Esmond, all the steady hands that had helped build something sustainable around me without taking anything away, without demanding I diminish myself to make them comfortable. I once begged for a place at someone else's table, desperate for validation and belonging. Now I have one I built myself, with my own hands and my own rules. And every morning, I wake up in a house that belongs entirely to me, eat breakfast in silence that feels like luxury rather than loneliness, and step out onto a porch where a brass plaque reminds me of the most important lesson I ever learned. Peace requires permission, and the only permission you truly need is your own.